guys, Diamond here with Candlelit Concepts. A couple weeks ago I made on a whim, I made a candle, and it was a watermelon sundae. And I wasn't sure, this was kind of the first time I had made the candle, so I wasn't quite sure how it was going to sell. And to my surprise, they sold very quickly. So today I decided I'm going to make a video to show you step by step how I made those watermelon sundae candles. So before I start any candle project, I always gather my supplies. And for this specific candle, I decided to use this cute little sundae glass container. And then of course I gathered my waxes. The reason why I'm doing two separate waxes is the main candle I'm using a blend of different types of waxes. It's got a higher melting point, but it tends to hold color better, it doesn't melt during shipping. So I tend to use the blended wax for like the main part of the candle. But then for the little bit of whipped cream that I'm going to put on top of the candle, I decided to use just 100% soy. It is a lot softer wax, but this wax you can whip up and pipe, which is why I'm choosing to use this type of wax for the whipped icing, or the whipped cream on top. And then I gathered my little sprinkles. These do not burn in the candle, they just, as the wax melts, they end up at the bottom of the candle. But this is what I will sprinkle on the whipped cream portion. And then of course I've got my piping bag, and I do use a Wilton 1M piping tip. This tends to be the tip that I use the most, mainly because when I'm piping the soy wax, it doesn't clog because it is a much wider opening. And then I have my little stirring stick. I did take a paper straw, and I just cut the ends off because you're not going to want to stick the whole straw down into the candle. That's really unnecessary. Plus, really the straw needs to be removed before it's lit. So generally I'll pipe the whipped cream on top, and I'll just gently put this in, just a small amount of the wax, enough to hold it in place, but really the customer removes it prior to lighting. So got my little straws ready. Now I've got my wicks. For this candle I am choosing to use zinc core wicks versus a cotton wick, and the reason being is back to that blend of soy. It does take a higher melting point to melt this wax, and if I use just a cotton wick, it doesn't tend to get hot enough to actually melt, and I'll end up with like cratering. And so I prefer to use the zinc core wick because this one does get hotter, which gives me a nice even burn. And then I have my wick stickers to attach the wick to the container. I've got my centering devices. I do always put just a little bit of aluminum foil on my tray, and the reason being is when I go to color the main wax, I like to take my spoon when the wax is melted, grab a little bit of the melted wax, put it on my aluminum foil, let that solidify so that I can really gauge what the color of the wax is going to be once it's hardened. And I continue adding different or more candle wax, liquid colorant to the candle wax until I reach my desired appearance. So in this candle, I'm going to be using two different liquid colorants. One is Christmas red and one is melon. And then I do have two pipettes. That way I'm not dipping and contaminating one color with the other. So I've got my two pipettes. And then I do have my fragrance oil already pre-measured. This one is for like the main candle, and then this one is for the little bit of whipped cream we're gonna put on top. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the waxes melted, and I will be back. Alright, so while the wax is melting on the stove, I am going to prep my containers by adding my zinc core wick to the container with the candle sticker. So I attach the candle sticker to the bottom. I usually press a few times just to make sure that it's secured. And then I will center the wick down into the container. Sometimes it does like to bounce around. Then I will take my centering device and I will use it to press the metal portion down onto the cup. And that's it. Alright guys, so we're back, and as you can see, most of my soy blend wax has been completely melted. I do have a couple small chunks in there, but I pulled it from the heat because if I continue to heat the wax, I fear that I can burn it. And so really a couple small pieces in there, the heat from the actual melted wax will continue to melt that chunk. So I'm gonna let it do its thing. In the meantime, we're gonna start coloring the wax. And again, I've got my 2 pipettes. I'm gonna use one for each color just so that we don't contaminate one color with the other. And I'm gonna start by doing the melon. And I'm not too sure how much we're gonna need, so I started with 3 drops of melon, and I'm gonna do equal parts red. So 1, 2, 3. We'll give that a stir. And I'll take my spoon and scoop out a small amount onto my aluminum foil. And I can tell already it's very, very light. So I am going to continue adding more colorant. Our first go, very pale color. So as you can see, we got a much darker result this time. I am going to keep going. I want it to be a little bit more deeper red color. So this time I'm only adding Christmas red. I'm not adding any more melon. So here's our 3 colors. This is where we are currently, and I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to stop adding coloring dye to it, and we'll get to pouring the candle. So once I'm happy with how much liquid colorant I've added to my wax, I always check the temperature, because I want to make sure that whatever the temperature is, that it's less than the flash point of the fragrance oil. And the reason being is if your wax is too hot and the temperature is higher than your fragrance oil, you will actually burn off the fragrance oil. And so, yeah, I always double check, make sure that my wax is at a lower temperature than that flash point of whatever fragrance I'm using. And please keep in mind, each fragrance has its own flash point. Not all fragrances are the same. So generally you'll find the flash point of the fragrance listed on the website of whatever company you purchase the fragrance from. So right now we're sitting at about 185 degrees Fahrenheit, which is lower than the flash point of the fragrance I'm using. I am using Watermelon. I did purchase this fragrance oil from Aztec Candle Company. So I'm going to go ahead and add the oil, and I'm going to get this stirred in. One way that you would know if you burnt off the fragrance oil by accident is there would be smoke coming up from your melting pot. If you see smoke, you've burnt the fragrance oil off. One way to fix that is just to add more fragrance oil. The downfall to that, though, is you really don't know if you burned it all off or if you only burned off some of it. So sometimes by adding more, you're kind of just adding blindly, and you can have issues with your wax solidifying properly. You could also see sweating where really there's too much fragrance oil, and so it's kind of, you know, it didn't get mixed in well, or there's too much, and so it kind of shows on the top of your candle. It'll look like the candle's sweating. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes it's best to just start over. All right, so I am just checking the temperature again. We're sitting at about 167, which is perfect for us to pour the wax into our containers. Just gonna get rid of the liquid coloring to make us some space. I'm also throwing these pipettes away. So another thing about pouring your wax at the right temperature is we're looking for a couple of things. We want it to adhere to the glass properly. And so if you pour too hot or too cold, like, you run risk of that not working out for you well. The other thing is if you pour too hot, your sticker can actually come unstuck from the glass due to the excessive heat, and therefore you end up with a floating wick, which is also not a good thing. So best if that happens to you, pour the wax from the container back into your melting pot, clean it out, reattach the wick, and then pour again. So here we go. I am also only going to be filling up to the little notch in the design because I want to be able to leave enough space for us to pipe our whipped cream on top. Also, I'm paying attention to my boxes are only 8 inches tall, and so if I pipe too far out above the rim of the cup, the candle won't fit in my packaging containers. So I'm taking all of that into account prior to starting my candle. I do have a little bit of remnant in my melting pot, so generally when I have extra like that, I will go ahead and grab out a sample container and make that for my customers. So I have these little 2-ounce metal candle tins with the screw-on lid. I will pour my remnants in here and have this set out on my shelf next to this candle, so that way people can use this as a way to smell each fragrance versus handling the candle itself. I've had people drop my product before, and so these little, smell me testers are a great way for me to eliminate that issue, but also provide them with the opportunity of smelling the candle before purchase. I think I have enough for one more, so I'm going to go ahead and pour that. And then none of my wax is going to waste either, so I'm going to go ahead and get my centering device placed. Now I do get asked a lot, how do I clean out my melting pot after I have made my candles? And the best way that I've found to clean that out is by taking paper towels while the wax is still in a liquid form in the melting pot and just wiping out the melting pot with those paper towels and then throwing the paper towels away. So I'm going to go ahead and clean out my melting pot. We'll let these solidify, and then I will be back to show you the whipped cream portion of this wonderful, cute watermelon sundae candle. So while our watermelon sundae candles are solidifying, I have gone ahead and melted down the 100% soy wax that we're going to use for the whipped cream on top of our sundae candle. Now, the key to being able to pipe this wax is that we've got to let it cool and continue to stir it while it's cooling, because as it starts to solidify, us continuing to stir it is really what's going to give us our consistency to be able to pipe it through the piping bag. I am going to go ahead and add my 0.30 fragrance oil to it and get that stirred in. You do have to be patient with this. The more wax you have, the longer it's going to take for the wax to get to the consistency that you need to be able to pipe it. The less wax you have, the faster that process will happen. So just take that into account. If you have a lot of wax, it's going to take some time for the mixture to cool enough to be able to pipe it. So I'm just going to leave this here, and on occasion I'm going to come back and continue to stir it until we are at the right consistency. So I'll be back. All right, so I think we're at a point that I'm happy with our 100% soy wax mixture. It's still pretty soft, but by the time we get it into the piping bag and actually start piping it, it should be pretty at the right consistency. So I'm going to go ahead and add this into the piping bag. I did put the piping bag over a container just to keep it open. When you're working by yourself, you got to find creative ways to have extra hands. So So I'm just using the scoop to get all of the wax out of the melting pot. I did do 5 ounces of this wax, even though we're not going to use all 5 ounces. I wanted to have plenty to work with. So I'm just going to move this all the way down, and we are ready to pipe. So I'm going to grab our candle. So here's our first watermelon sundae. I'm also going to bring over the sprinkles, and the reason being is as soon as we pipe the whipped cream on the candle, we are going to want to immediately place the sprinkles while this mixture is still somewhat wet. If you pipe everything first and then try to go back to add the sprinkles, the outer layer, because it's such a small amount of wax, will have already solidified to the point where when you try to put these sprinkles on, they're just going to roll right off and not stick to the mixture. So I always start by piping some around the wick first. And you can add as much whipped cream as you see fit to get your desired appearance. So then I'm going to sprinkle my sprinkles onto the wax. And this is also the point where you're going to want to add that little tiny piece of straw that we cut earlier, because again the wax is still malleable, and so it'll stick in there easier than if I let that harden first. So once I have it placed where I want it, we'll move on to the next. If you do end up with a clog in your piping bag, easiest way to get rid of it is just to heat this tip over the stove for just a few seconds, and it'll melt the wax in that is solidified and stuck in the tip. And then you can pipe some out onto like a scrap piece of paper or some tin foil, and once it's back to piping properly, then you can move on. So I just heated my tip a little bit, and now we're piping okay. Like that. So now that we've piped our whipped cream on top of the candle, now I'm going to take this little bamboo skewer and I'm going to just twist the wick around it to give it a cute little twirl. I do this to all of my wicks just because I think it adds a kind of just the last little finishing touch of cuteness to it. It's kind of my signature. The only candles that I don't curl like this are my container candles. Alright, so I'm going to set these aside. Now we're going to deal with our little testers that we created from the extra wax. So we're going to go ahead and screw these lids on. And I do have a label maker that is a thermal printer, and so I kind of created these little smell me stickers with the fragrance listed on there, and I just simply place this in the center of the lid. And again, these will be placed on the shelf with the candles so that people are picking these up and smelling these instead of picking up the candles and manipulating those heavily. So there's our testers, and we are all finished. Thanks guys for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to comment below. Thank you.